Welcome back to Saving Sapiens, the podcast where we explore the history of our species and the cutting edge of medicine tomorrow. I'm excited to welcome our guest today, Dr. Thibault Geoui. He is a biotech and life sciences leader with over 20 years of experience driving innovation across pharma R&D, AI, and lab automation. He's led product launches at QIAGEN, strategic transformations at Elsevier and Charles River, and now spearheads pharma lab automation strategy at Zulke. He also hosts the Tech and Drugs podcast, where he explores how AI and data are reshaping the future of biotech and pharmaceuticals. Can you tell us about how this revolutionary new approach to AI-driven drug discovery is different from the way that drugs have classically been discovered over the previous decades?
Okay, so that's a big question. How long do we have? So if you look at the traditional drug discovery process, over the past several decades, so the type of metrics that we are looking at is, on average, it takes 10 to 12 years to develop a drug. And that's not even counting all the basic research that was done in academia. So, if we look at some of the most famous drugs recently, like the GLP-1 inhibitor, like Ozempic, for instance, before the research started in pharma, there was something like 30 years of work in academia. So 30 years of work in academia, then 10 to 12 years in pharma. So, sometimes you're counting 40, 50 years of work to get the drug out. Then the cost. There is a recent paper that evaluated that for large pharma, it costs approximately $6 billion to develop a drug. And then there is the failure rate.
Wow.
95%. So, imagine in any other industry, you go to your boss and you say, I'm going to start a new project. It will take 12 years. It will cost $6 billion, and most probably it will fail in 95% of the case. So that's essentially traditional pharma. So in many ways, it's not a very good process. And you have to, you always have to think about, okay, why are we doing that? Obviously we are doing that because we want to cure diseases. There are approximately 20,000 known diseases. Out of those 20,000 known diseases, I think 14 or 15,000 of them are rare diseases, and I know we'll talk about that later. So rare disease, essentially, it's a disease where in the US you have less than 200,000 patients. And we have approximately 3,000 to 4,000 approved drugs. And those approved drugs, a lot of them treat the same kind of disease. You have popular disease, for instance, heart disease or oncology, or so you have category of diseases that will attract a lot of drug development, simply because from a financial standpoint it makes sense. So that's kind of portraying where is the industry today. So takes a lot of time, costs a lot, fails a lot, and then we have drugs for a very small portion of the diseases. So there is a lot of unmet needs. And the worst part is that it's getting worse with time. So if you look at the cost of developing drugs, between the 1950s to today, so today it costs 100 times more than in the 1950s to develop a drug, even if you adjust that for inflation. So now comes AI. So why is AI really changing the game? Because if you look at the timelines for developing a drug, it's really shrinking the timelines for developing a drug. So drug development, you can cut it in different parts. So you have like the discovery phase, so which is really where you do kind of the basic research. Then you have the preclinical phase, where you will test your molecule in animal, then the clinical phase when you move that to human, and then this is where after that you will launch the drug. So this is approximately 12 years. The first phase, the discovery phase, discovery and preclinical, which can last between 4 and 6 years. There are companies using AI now that manage to get past those phases between 9 months and 18 months. So it's radically shrinking the time that it takes to develop a drug. The cost also is like 70 or 80% less. So now we also have to be honest and look at the numbers, because there are not a lot of drugs that went through this process that reach humans. We don't even have a drug that was developed by AI that was launched yet. So if you look at the pipeline of drugs that were developed by an AI platform, in 2023 there was a paper that counted the number of drugs at around 160, which is 0.1% of the entire pipeline of the industry. So it's really a drop in
Mm-hmm.
the water, like the number of drugs developed by AI that reach, that are in the discovery phase, and even less in the clinical phase. In the clinical phase, it's really a handful. So as I said, the paper was from 2023. So now with all the investment in AI, maybe the number is, like 2 or 3 times more, but it's still, maybe 0.5% of the pipeline of the whole industry. That being said, we can't ignore, that the fact that for those, that made it through those pipelines, they do it really, really fast and really, really cheap. So that's kind of where we are with AI today, and obviously there is a lot of hope because, as I said, like the normal way of developing drugs is kind of broken. So and maybe we'll talk about that later, but because there is, when there is hype, of course there is also people who look at that and say, it's just hype. It will slow down, and then we will go back to doing things the way we were doing them. But I'm always thinking, well, like the way we are developing drugs is not really working. So of course there is hype, but I think there is also something really real with the new technologies that we are using, with all the AI models. And to be honest, given all the untreated disease that exists, I don't see any real alternative. We need to make that work if we want to be able to address, this huge gap between the drugs that we have and all the disease that don't have any treatment.
Can you tell us about who the primary movers are? Is this something that is being advanced by big name pharmaceutical developers that we're already familiar with? Is it being advanced by smaller startup companies? Is it being promoted by the AI developers themselves? Who is actually making the strides in this direction?
I think we can say like everyone at the moment is trying to use AI in their drug development process, but they don't do it in the same way. So if you look at established large pharma, so they are all trying to use AI. They are all actually using AI in one way or another. But you can imagine, like that a large traditional pharma that has 50 to 100,000 employees, very established process. Using AI means that you're really changing your processes. It means that you need to have data platform and data flowing from one step to the other, which is very challenging in large pharma because of the way large pharmaceutical organizations are organized, where you have quite a lot of silos in the organization. For AI to work, you need to be able to use, data generated at one step, move it freely to the next step, et cetera, so that, what you find at one step will inform the development of the next steps. And when you look in the large pharmaceutical organization, there are really very strong silos between the departments. So some of the most successful large pharma are really working on that and are really reorganizing the department to make sure that now they are addressing those silo problems. But these are things that will literally take decades. So what you see in large pharma is AI used within those silos. So like improving the property of a molecule, where the medicinal chemist will work and will use some models to improve, I don't know, solubility, to improve how a compound can cross the blood-brain barrier, et cetera, et cetera. But it's not really used, across all the steps because of the complexity that I was telling you. Now there is a new breed of company that we call tech bio, and the tech bio they were really started. There are pharma company that were started almost as technological company. Think about company like in silico medicine or Recursion. So they really started a lot of them. They started in silico before they even had a lab. So they could really design their process to benefit from those new technologies. They could really couple the in silico work with the wet lab. So you do something in silico, you do some prediction, then you test those prediction in the wet lab, you generate some data, and you feed the data back to the model, in an iterative loop, and you improve. And obviously, some of those companies are the ones that I mentioned earlier that have those early success, who can move a compound through the early phase in 8 months, where normally it takes a few years. And I think the third player, so we mentioned the large pharma, the tech bio, and the third player is definitely the technology companies. So when we were talking before we started to record, we were talking about AlphaFold. So AlphaFold is a model that was developed by DeepMind, and there is DeepMind has a daughter company called Isomorphic Labs, and Isomorphic Labs essentially is a tech bio that was created by Google. So you see a lot of those technology companies investing in this space, and that's something that I find quite remarkable, because I think it's only recently that pharma, that life science is attracting so much funding, but also so much talent. So you see a lot of engineers who will have worked on completely different things in the past that are actually now trying to work on biology. You keep hearing, looking at biology as a new engineering discipline, or trying to engineer biology. And that's really what they are doing. And I find this really interesting, because obviously they look at it from a completely different lens or completely different angle than a standard life scientist will work on it. Now, I think what will make it or break it is to make sure that those engineers work hand in hand with a life scientist who have a deep understanding of the mechanism of life, and that they can really combine those two approaches, like the engineering approach and the standard life science approach. And that will be things that I think that will make them successful.
It's always a sticky point for me when we get to a point in medicine and in biomedical research where we start to talk about the integration of engineering approaches, particularly because of the importance of the evolutionary history of each species and the way that that creates a lot of very sort of messy historical contingencies built in to every bit of the biology of our species. Even when we discuss something as simple as the activity or the gene expression for an enzyme like amylase, we have to deal with the messy historical and evolutionary contingency of how the amylase enzyme expressed in your pancreas and the amylase enzyme expressed in your salivary glands are themselves identical copies one of the other, where something as simple as a ERV depositing itself into the targeting region has changed expression. And I think what this brings to mind is not just the risk management from the pharmaceutical and investment considerations during drug development, but also the risk management and the reality of risk management for patients as these new AI developed drugs go to actual clinical trials. Can you tell us thus far, with the few drugs that have made it to clinical trials after being discovered with this AI route instead of the traditional sort of wet lab route in biomedical research, do we have enough information to be able to talk about either the safety or the efficacy of AI developed drugs?
So we don't really have anything that is statistically relevant. As I said, we have just a handful of drugs that made it to phase one, phase two. I think we start to have phase three now. I'm not even sure, but I think I will step back a little bit and say, look, AI drugs or not AI drugs, in the end, it's a drug, and they need to go through similar regulatory process. So I think it doesn't really matter, and for the patient especially, it should not really matter whether something was developed by an AI or by a more traditional approach, because you still need to fulfill the same regulatory standard. You will not give something to a patient without making sure that you have a certain degree of certainty regarding the toxicity and the efficacy of a drug. In the end, those drugs would have been tested on animal, and of course, animal doesn't always translate well to human, but there are a lot of things that you can test from a safety profile on an animal, and that you have to test from a safety profile on animal. Now, obviously, with a new mandate from the FDA also to move away from animal testing, there is a lot of investment in new approaches to test the drugs before they go to the clinic. So whether it's an AI developed drugs or a drug developed from in a more traditional approach, you have to do that. So I think really from a patient perspective, it should not matter. I mean, the only thing that should matter to a patient is, am I getting a drug to treat my condition? Uh, is this drug developed and marketed fast enough? Is the drug cheap enough so that some condition that you will not be able to treat with a standard approach, because the cost of developing drug is so high. Now, if you can lower the development cost, then there are all of a sudden some diseases where like it makes sense actually to develop the drug from a financial standpoint. So I don't know if I answered your question, but I think it's important. Really, a drug is a drug, and in the end, we for like every decade will bring a new technology that we bring to the like to the drug development tech stack. And AI, of course, everyone is talking about it at the moment, and it's a technology which you can apply at many steps of the drug discovery and development, unlike some of the other technology that we had in the past that were improving like very specific part of drug discovery and development. I mean, think about genome sequencing, for instance. I mean, genome sequencing, complete revolution, but it's something which is important at a very specific step. Whereas AI, you can have AI to understand the biology, you can have AI to develop, to design a drug, whether it's a small molecule or an antibody. You can have AI to help you design your clinical trial. So it's AI. It's really an umbrella term, and it's more of a toolbox than just a tool.
Take a moment to kind of talk with you about the history of the biomedical research enthusiasm as it played out about a quarter century ago now
Mhm.
with the Human Genome Project, and kind of ask you about what you think the future holds for the personalized side of AI drug development. Because when the United States was pursuing the Human Genome Project, there was a lot of hype around the idea that we would get this really, really clear data packet about each person, about humanity as a species, that once we had the human genome fully mapped out, we would basically have a roadmap, a blueprint to finding out exactly what the origin of disease was. And there was this very significant hype over pushing funding in the direction of unlocking the human genome, with the promise that we were going to be able to go back into whatever the source of disease was and edit our way to a new era, an unprecedented era of better human health. It turned out, of course, over the years since its publication in 2000, that we've learned an enormous amount about genetics. Thousands and thousands of papers have been published in the literature. We have platform after platform and pipeline after pipeline of accelerated discovery for gene sequencing and whole genome sequencing. And the cost, of course, has dropped just from the insane national investment that was initially the Human Genome Project funding, all the way down to where we can do genome sequencing for, less than a person's mortgage payment. And nevertheless, we still have a very tenuous grasp on the connection between the genome and disease for the vast majority of health conditions, except for the ones that are due to like a single nucleotide polymorphism, the sort of single, you know, misplaced base pair that can lead to some catastrophic disease. And I'm wondering if you think that the future of AI drug discovery will continue to basically be a more polished version, maybe even a cost saving version of the current pathway of drug discovery, where we're still experiencing a high failure rate, where we spend millions to get a drug into clinical trials only to find that the efficacy barely passes statistical significance. Or if you are more optimistic in the kind of predictions that we're seeing, where people say, oh, you're going to have your AI digital health twin with all your biometric data, and then if you get sick, the AI will discover a drug that is literally tailored just for you as the individual patient. Which direction do you think?
I think the problem, it's always the same. It's always, like the problem of hype and expectation. And, like when you have a new technology, which is so hyped, you can only be disappointed because you expect so much, and either it doesn't deliver on the on the scope, or in the time. Things don't come fast enough. And I'll talk a bit more about the genome thing, but I think with AI, the challenge is that we want everything now. uh, and I think we have to remind ourselves. Okay, I think AI existed before ChatGPT, of course, but so ChatGPT, I think, is really this moment that really triggered this explosion in funding, and the hype cycle. We have to remember it's only 3 years ago. I mean, I've been in technology for over a decade, and I have never seen product or product category that developed and improved so fast. It's crazy, and I think people expect so much from what's happening with AI, that they don't even realize that the pace of technological improvement, we've never seen that. We've never seen something like that. I've been a product manager responsible for digital product, and when you release digital product, you have incremental improvement. Like, okay, now if you look at the pace of improvement between GPT-3 and GPT-5, it's been exponential. Okay, GPT-5 launch now, I think maybe not the best product launch in history, but still, I mean, the capabilities of what we have now, you know just a few years ago, that will have been science fiction. So now back
Yeah.
to back to drug discovery and development, and let's talk a little bit about the genome. I think like one thing, and you mentioned it. I always found this extremely naive when we think that we want to link a gene to a disease. Like that there is a single link. Like this mutation or this target. If I develop a drug against this target, I will cure this disease. And as you said, I mean, unless you have like a very specific point mutation, which very often will be associated to a rare disease. Most of the time, diseases are much more complex than that. I mean, anyone who just look at a map of our metabolism, it's crazy. It's super complex. It has pathways going left, right, up and down. So I think it's incredibly naive to think that like one drug against one target will cure disease. I think when you think about it, I think we've been extremely lucky, to be able to be relatively successful at curing disease with this approach for many years. So back to your question on AI, I think what makes me really hopeful that AI will actually deliver better result and help us, develop better drugs, is that I think AI has this ability to handle complexity much better than the human brain. And what we see in biology is that you have properties that are emerging at different scale. When you start to look at not just the target, but the network, the cell, then one level above the tissue, the organ, and the organism. And when you have interplay between all those different levels, then you start to see very interesting property emerging. And I think this is the type of thing that AI model can capture that we can't really capture. Now, back to your question, is it going to help us develop personalized drugs? I think it will, but the question is the timeline, the time frame. Will it do it in the next 3 years? I don't think so. I think we need to be realistic. I think it will really change, and it is already changing the way we think about drug discovery and development. But we have to be realistic on the timeline. Again, if we go back to ChatGPT was launched 3 years ago. That's really the thing that launched this investment in every industry, including in pharma. But then we need to, how good are we at integrating those tools in pharma? So I'm sure you've seen this paper from MIT that was not specific to the pharma industry, but that looked at every industry, every company trying to launch generative AI project, and they said they failed 95% of the time. And this figure made the headline everywhere. But if you actually read the paper, it says also that for those 5% of companies that really uh, thought about how to integrate AI in their process and really redesign their process around the integration of AI, they saw a dramatic, improvement in productivity. And I think this is really the thing that we have to think about. AI is a technology, but the technology is used by people. And people are complex, people are messed up, and very often what we see in companies, the problem is not the technology, it's the people using the technology. I have many anecdotes on that. Actually, I worked a couple of years ago on a program where we had a collaboration with an AI company that was giving us a list of compounds that they had predicted for targets that we will work on. They will send us those compounds, and then our medicinal chemist, will look at them and then say, "Hey, let's test that in the lab." Very often, the reaction from the medicinal chemist was, "I don't like this list because my intuition tells me it's wrong." So I always had to have discussion with them, saying, "Well, of course, your intuition tells you it's wrong because it comes from an AI model, so it doesn't think the way you do. But then let's try to look at this from with a scientific approach. In the end, you take it, you test it, and you see if it works. If it doesn't, then we move on and we try something else." But you see, I think like to be able to make progress, it means that we will have to change the way we work to be able to use those tools. Now there is another thing that I find quite incredible, and I don't know if you saw this paper. There was a Nature paper, I think, that was published yesterday, a big collaboration between the European Molecular Biology Laboratory, the Cancer Research Center in Germany. I think Novo Nordisk was involved, and it's a paper that used I think it was the data from the UK Biobank, and they also used data from a big Danish repository, where essentially they could predict diseases 20 years before they happen. So they will take all the medical history from someone, and then use a model that, based on the medical history, could predict essentially what will happen in the next couple of decades. So talking about precision medicine or personalized medicine, I think for me, that's really what gets me excited. It's not really developing a drug for a disease that you have, but the ultimate healthcare is preventing drug from happening. So imagine, if everyone can have that, can have access to their health trajectory, and say, if you continue to do the thing the way you do them, if you don't change anything, this is what will happen to you in 20 years. Now combine that with all the things that we have access to now. So as you said, you can get your genome sequence for relatively free. Everyone is wearing some, like some device like an Apple Watch or something. Now you have services. I don't know if you're familiar with a company called Neko Health. So Neko Health, and there are plenty of companies that are doing similar thing. I'm sure in the US too. But Neko was created by the founder of Spotify, and essentially it's a clinic where you go and you get, thousands of health data points, and they use those thousands of health data points to tell you, okay, like this is, and you go there, by the way, you're healthy, you go to the clinic, you get all those things, you go every 6 months, and then you accumulate all those data. They've been operating for 2 years, and the remarkable thing is that um, for the past 2 years, they have like 1 or 2% of the people going to the clinic. And as I said, they go there, they feel perfectly fine. That actually were not fine at all, and that were sent immediately to the hospital, but just before something really serious will happen. So I think they prevented a few heart attacks and things like that. So I think that's really the thing that gets me excited is this ability now to actually prevent diseases, to track, what happens, before the disease happen, because we all know that diseases, they don't happen like that. I mean, you have plenty of molecular processes that are accumulating for a long time, and then at some point, it's like water, water in a glass, and then at some point, the glass completely fills, and then it spills out. But then you need to have all those things accumulating for decades. We know that, for instance, for Alzheimer's disease, that it's something that it's a process that takes decades before you have even the small the first symptoms. So what if you could pinpoint those symptoms, those markers very very early on, at the very beginning of the process, and then do something about it.
And part of the power in the sort of big data AI approach is that when it can be established that there is a correlation between a certain multivariate input and some negative output, like the onset of a myocardial infarction, the incidence of a stroke, some other catastrophic, uh, rapid onset disease, or even the prediction that there will be a chronic disease onset like type 2 diabetes, holds enormous promise for saving and extending patient lives. But it opens up the possibility that there won't necessarily be an individual diagnostic feature, because that's kind of the old model of medicine. If we had an individual laboratory finding or an independent uh, say radiological finding, where we could say this particular lab value or this particular imaging finding is predictive or is diagnostic of this particular disease outcome, AI is able to potentially surpass that by taking these correlations across so many variables that we may not be able to word it in a way that a classically trained physician could even describe to a patient. When we say, hey, on your current trajectory, you have, say, a 65% or a 75% chance of having a heart attack by the age of 55 or something. We may not be able to say there's the one specific metric that is telling us this. And the question that this raises in my mind is, if the AI becomes personalized to the degree that it can both provide this long-term trajectory and provide some kind of early pharmacologic intervention, perhaps a pill that the patient can take starting at the age of 25 to reduce the chance of them having some coronary artery calcifications when they're in their 40s or 50s. If it happens that this doesn't match the intuitions of classical drug developers, if it doesn't match the intuitions of classically trained physicians, and if the AI isn't necessarily able to give us the mechanism that it is predicting for either the onset or the prevention of that disease, where does the bottleneck come from? Like, is it going to be that patients won't trust it? Is it going to be that the doctors won't prescribe it? Or is it going to be that the drug developers won't develop it? Or is it going to be at the regulatory stage where a country will simply not approve that kind of intervention? Do you predict that there will be a particularly difficult bottleneck?
It's a new tool, it's a new approach, which means that I think we need to rethink things outside of the conventional silos. Because, like you mentioned, all those silos, like you have patient, you have physician, you have the drug developers, you have the regulators. Uh, I think, and okay, and the other thing also, think about the physician. You mentioned images or blood markers. I don't know how it is in the US, but for instance, in Germany, if I wanted to have access to, all of my data, I don't even know where they are. And if they are somewhere, they are so freaking siloed and segmented that, it's not like I have one database where there is everything that there is to know about Thibault doesn't exist. So I think that's the first problem. That if we want to go in this direction, we need to rethink so many things. We need to rethink when we are collecting data for a patient, how do we collect those data so that we can actually use them, that we can run them through an AI? And by the way, I mean that's very similar to what I was saying earlier on when we were talking about drug discovery and development. Again, data silos. Data silos were not a problem when things were very sequential. When like you have a scientific question, you do an experiment, you get data, you analyze those data, and then you move on. You give that to the next department to do the next thing. With AI, it's much more, like data need to flow left and right because you will use data generated at a certain stage, and like for instance, something will fail, and you will feed that back to the very early development stage to say, hey, if we continue in this direction, things will fail. So use this failure to change how you design a drug. So now back to the patient. Well, we'll need to collect data in a very different way. We'll need to label data in a certain way. We'll need to store the data in a certain way, and it means that all those stakeholder, in healthcare will have to work together very differently. And I'm not even talking about other problems like data privacy, regulation around that, legal stuff. I mean, that's an entirely important but also different challenge that will need to be addressed. So again, I don't know if I answering your question, but I think there are so many things that we need to address before we can get to this point where people have their data are being used to recommend like lifestyle changes, early drug intervention, et cetera, and then that coordinated with a physician, with a pharma company, with the insurance as well, because that raises also so many questions, from a health insurance standpoint.
If I had to tell a young person going into the field, my prediction that I think will really shake up, especially health systems in the West, is that I think we're going to see an incredibly diverse approach across the globe to what the regulatory parameters are going to be on just how fast AI is going to be allowed to accelerate drug discovery and small population cohort clinical trials. And I think we're going to see an entirely new and highly amplified era of medical tourism when countries that have looser regulatory parameters are offering personalized drug development for every single thing that a person can imagine. I think that's going to create a major unexpected shakeup that people aren't going to know how to deal with. So that's my disruptive prediction. What do you think will be the most what do you think will be the most surprising and currently unsuspected outcome as AI starts to play a bigger and bigger role?
I'm not necessarily thinking about the drug discovery part, but more about the diagnostic part, because I think for the diagnostic part, we are already seeing that. As I was mentioning, this company, Neko Health, at the moment they operate in, I think, in Sweden and in the UK, and I'm like, I want to get this service. It's not very expensive. It's like $400 per scan. You do it every 6 months, and it gives you fantastic data. And I'm like, that's definitely worth it. So like sometimes I'm even thinking, okay, should I just like get on the plane and go to London and get that done? I mean, I live in Frankfurt. London is an hour flight, and I was listening to a podcast recently, and there was an American lady who went to Turkey and got like all sort of you know diagnostics as well, like blood analysis, scanner, etc., etc. And she was saying, well, like it costs a fraction of what it will have cost in the US. And I think it's not only the cost, because in some countries, if you want to do that, you will need to get a recommendation from your GPs. And there are countries where as long as you pay, you will get the service. So I think like to your point, this is already happening, not necessarily at the drug level, but more at the diagnostic level, because we are already starting to see those very innovative, personalized diagnostic things that are available in some countries and not everywhere. And I think, with all the discussion around longevity, around people who want to monitor, like everyone is wearing a smartwatch, and everyone is getting some personalized metrics. So I think there is now more people are more conscious that if they have the right data, they can do something about their health. They can impact their health. They can do something uh, before disease happen. So there is definitely this willingness to get access to those services, and I think people are getting frustrated when they can't get it. So now, of course, I mean, imagine you take that to the next step, and you will have different countries, different regulation where you can access different treatment, and of course, people will do more medical tourism than what they do today.
Thank you so much for taking the time to talk with us about the frontier of medicine and how it's being impacted by AI, especially as it pertains to drug discovery. Really appreciate you breaking it down for us and offering us insight into how this will drive change in the future of medicine. If you want to leave us with any last words or any instructions on how to find out more about your work so I can send some people your way.
As you mentioned at the beginning, I also have my podcast where I'm talking to people who are using technology to advance drug discovery and development, and there are just like so many people to that you can follow. So maybe I'll give you a list and you can put that somewhere in the description. Uh, it's very challenging to stay on top of what's happening at the moment, because things are going so fast. And again, I find this I find this so for someone who has been in this field for so many years, like as I was saying, 10 years ago, when you were an engineer, you would work on like on some cool lifestyle apps. Now I think more and more are looking at our industry and are saying, well, actually, it's really, really cool to be an engineer and to work on very challenging biology projects, or to help, redesign clinical trials to improve how we develop drugs. So I'm really glad that we are seeing this wave of new talent, of diverse talent coming to this industry, and tackling an industry that really has that needs to be shaken. So yeah. I'll leave you with that.
Awesome. Thank you so
Thanks, Matt.
much.